Hi folks, today we are looking at English Language Paper 2, Question 3. If this is the first video in this series that you've watched, I recommend you go back through the playlist and start from the beginning of the series. And if you don't have the paper that accompanies this video, I suggest you go to amysmithliterature.wordpress.com, click on English Language Paper 2 and then download the exam paper so that you know what you're looking at. Okay, so question 3 says you now need to refer to the last paragraph of source A. Make sure you follow the instructions about which section of the text you're looking at. The exam paper might give you line numbers, for example, and I would put a box on the exam paper around the section of the text that we're looking at. I've picked it out for you here on the screen though. And the question says, how does Dickens use language to describe the weather at this point in his journey? The how is a signal that we need to analyse. We'll talk about what that means in a minute. The question specifies that we're looking at language, and again we'll look at what that means in a minute. The topic is weather, and we have 12 marks for this question, which means we've got about 12 to 15 minutes to answer it in the exam. So let's just have a quick read of the paragraph that it's pointing at as well. So Dickens is writing, "It was not in such a season, however, that we traversed this road on our way to Rome. The middle of January was only just past, and it was very gloomy and dark weather, very wet besides. In crossing the fine pass of Braccio, sorry about my pronunciation there, potentially, we encountered such a storm of mist and rain, and we travelled in a cloud the whole way. There might have been no Mediterranean in the world, for anything we saw of it there, except when a sudden gust of wind, clearing the mist before it for a moment, showed the agitated sea at great depth below, lashing the distant rocks and spouting up its foam furiously. The rain was incessant, every brook and torrent was greatly swollen, and such a deafening leaping and roaring and thundering of water I never had the like of in my life." Okay, so I said we'd come back to the question. So it asks us how, and that is signalling that we need to analyse. Now, there's some questions on this paper that don't have the word how in them, and that means that you don't need to analyse. But if you see how, the examiner expects you to comment on the methods. So, for example, verb, imagery, personification, pathetic fallacy, and so on. And also why the writer uses that particular method. The question is also specifying that we're looking at language, so it's language analysis that we're doing. And when it says language, it means words or phrases. And really high impact language methods to look for in the extract are verbs, so doing words or action words, or imagery. So this might be a metaphor or a simile, a picture, a symbol, a motif, something visual in the text. You can also look for all of these things. And if you download the knowledge organizer from my website, you can find a full list of the language devices that you might want to look for. If you spot something and you don't know the name of the method, describe it. So for example, there might be some hyperbole in the text. You might not remember the word hyperbole in the stress of the exam. So write that that Dickens is exaggerating what he's looking at. Okay, that's absolutely fine. It's better to have a description of the method than not to mention it at all because you're worried about getting it wrong. So step 1 then in answering the question, we need to identify where Dickens mentions the weather. Hopefully you've got a copy of the text in front of you, and your job now is to stop the video, highlight the references to the weather in that paragraph, and then start the video again when you're ready. Okay, here we go. So we've got in 4 different colours the different quotations that we have about the weather. And we're going to move on to step 2, which is where we're identifying the methods. So in the yellow quotation, it says it's very gloomy and dark weather, very wet besides. We have some adjectives, so gloomy, dark and wet would all be adjectives. And we have the repetition of the word very. So you might pick up that repetition. You might be thinking, I don't know what type of word very is. Well, for the purposes of this video, it's an intensifier. It is intensifying the adjectives. You might not know that particular term. So if you're in the exam, you could say it's a repeated word which emphasizes the adjectives that follow. Then we need to think about why Dickens is using these particular methods. So the adjectives suggest the weather is bleak and oppressive. A British tourist might be surprised to encounter that kind of weather in Italy. And these negative adjectives create a sense of oppression. And then that repeated intensifier very emphasizes the extremity of the weather, highlighting just how unpleasant it is. If you really want to make your answer sparkle and you see something about the power of nature, you can say that man seems insignificant in contrast to the power of nature. Okay, time for you to have a practice then. So look at the pink quotation and you're going to repeat the steps that I've just done. So look for the methods in that quotation and then think about why it is used. So stop the video, do that, and then start the video again when you're ready. Okay, so here are my thoughts. You might have picked up different things. That is absolutely fine. One thing that I always look for in quotations is the verbs, because the verbs often give us an awful lot to write about. So here we have the verb clearing. So the wind is clearing the mist, and this particular verb suggests the strength and the power of the wind. We also have the verb lashing, so the sea is lashing the distant rocks, and here the weather causes the sea to respond violently, as if nature is battling with itself. We also have the adjective sudden, and know it's an adjective because it's describing the gust of wind, and this tells us that the weather is unpredictable and changeable. Okay, so I've picked some quotations. I know what methods are being used in the quotations, and I've thought about why those methods are being used as well. So now I've written the first section of my answer. So Dickens describes the weather as intense and oppressive, explaining that it was very gloomy and dark weather, very wet besides. At first glance, it is clear that the pair of adjectives gloomy and dark indicate the weather is bleak, which might surprise a British tourist choosing to travel to Italy on holiday. The sense of negativity created by these adjectives is amplified by the repetition of the intensifier very. This emphasizes the extremity of the weather, highlighting how unpleasant it is. Man seems insignificant in contrast to the power of nature. So if I break the answer into sections, I'll just show you how I've done that. So that first line in yellow is directly responding to the question. The question asked about how Dickens describes the weather, so I've used that phrase to start my answer. In green, we've got my quotation from the text. In blue, I've mentioned the methods, and then in pink, I've explained why those particular methods have been used. So that's one paragraph of my answer. Now, it's a 12-mark question, so you would need to write a couple of paragraphs to respond to it. But the most important thing is making sure that you've answered the question and met the expectations of the examiner. So the examiner is expecting to see some analysis, so the method and why that method is used. They're expecting to see a range of quotations. So one quote wouldn't be enough. I've only got one in this paragraph, so I need to write at least another paragraph to have a range of quotations as well. Okay, over to you. So if you've downloaded the paper from the website, you will see a section of it which has got some sentence starters to help you write your answer, and you've got your annotations there on the screen. So my suggestion is that you write your answer for this question. Good luck, and the next video will be on paper 2, question 4.